For years, millions of American families have fought the same battle, spraying, paying, and watching the bugs come right back. But one Amish farmer hasn't lost a single grain bin to insects in more than 20 years. For generations, Amish families have protected their homes using something so simple. Most modern homeowners walk right past it without ever knowing what it is. The strangest part isn't how well it works. It's why almost nobody talks about it anymore. And the biggest mistake people make happens before they even buy it. It is 4 in the morning, and I am standing in my grain bin with a lantern, and the only sound is my own breathing and the scratch of my boots on the floorboards. The air in here smells like dry corn dust and old wood, warm even in the cold, the way a barn always seems to hold its own weather. I run my hand along the top of the grain, and it is smooth and undisturbed. Not a single tunnel or a single dead husk pushed to the surface. 22 years I have kept grain in this bin. Not once, not one single time have I lost a bushel to weevils. Rare. Meanwhile, I hear the English talk about spending $40, $60, sometimes $90 a month on pest control trucks that spray a chemical they cannot even pronounce. And still the ants come back in July and the roaches come back in August like they signed a lease. I have a neighbor down the county road, an English fellow, who told me once he has a contract with a company that comes every 30 days, rain or shine, and he still finds ants marching across his kitchen counter by the second week. My family has never called one of those trucks. Not once in the 19 years I have run this farm. We have used the same fine white powder my grandmother used, and her mother before her, and it costs less than the tip you would leave a pizza delivery driver. My name is Elias Yoder. I am Amish, and what I am about to show you is so simple, so cheap, that the first time I explained it to that same English neighbor, he did not believe me until he saw it with his own eyes. By the end of this video, you will know exactly what this powder is, exactly where to buy it, exactly how much to use, exactly where to put it in your own house, and exactly why the men in the pest control trucks would rather you never found out about it. You will also know the one mistake that ruins this powder for almost everyone who tries it the first time, and how to avoid it completely. But here is what surprised me most when I first started digging into this. The mistake almost nobody talks about isn't about where you put the powder. It's about what kind you buy, and getting it wrong can actually be dangerous. Stay with me, because near the end, I am going to tell you something about this powder that even most of the farmers who use it every day do not know. Something about where it actually comes from that will make you look at your kitchen floor a little differently. Now, I want to be fair to the pest control industry before I say anything else, because I do not believe in conspiracies. I do not think there is a room somewhere with men in suits deciding to keep you in the dark. It is simpler than that, and in some ways it is worse. When a solution costs $8 and lasts a year, and your business model depends on a truck coming back every 30 days, you do not need a meeting to decide to look the other way. Nobody needs to coordinate anything. Everybody in that industry just needs to stay quiet, and the silence takes care of itself. But here's the part that took me years to fully understand. This powder was studied and used by the United States government as far back as the 1960s for grain storage, and it is still approved today by the EPA as a registered pesticide, which is a fact you can check yourself, because it is sitting right there in public records. It is not hidden. It is just never mentioned to you standing in a big box store aisle full of spray cans with skulls and warnings on them. Grain elevators and feed mills across the Midwest have used it for decades to protect stored corn and wheat from insect damage without leaving behind a chemical residue that would make the grain unsafe to handle, which tells you something about how confident the people who actually study this stuff are in its safety. I remember standing at a grain co-op counter once, listening to an English farmer ask the clerk why nobody ever mentioned this powder to homeowners the way it gets mentioned to farmers. The clerk just shrugged and said, "Because farmers ask and homeowners don't know to." That one sentence stuck with me longer than almost anything else I heard that year. But confidence in a public record does not put money in anybody's pocket, and a bag of powder that lasts a family a full year does not build a route of repeat customers the way a monthly spray contract does. So the two things simply live side by side, the honest, checkable science on one hand, and an industry that has no reason to bring it up on the other. And once you understand that, the rest of what I'm about to show you starts to make a lot more sense. Rare. So let me tell you what it actually is, because the name sounds stranger than the thing itself. It is called diatomaceous earth, and I know that is a mouthful, so just remember it as fossil powder, because that is exactly what it is. Millions of years ago, tiny creatures called diatoms lived in lakes and oceans, and their shells were made of a natural glass-like substance. Over time, those shells piled up at the bottom of ancient lakebeds, layer after layer, and eventually those lakebeds dried out and became soft white rock that you can crumble between two fingers. Picture a cliff of that soft white rock somewhere out west, chalky and pale, looking for all the world like ordinary stone, except every single grain of it used to be alive. Men mine that rock, grind it into a powder finer than flour, and that is the whole secret. There is no chemical reaction. There is no poison in the way you are used to thinking about poison. And that's exactly what makes what happens next so strange. Here is the science, and I will make it simple. Under a microscope, every one of those tiny fossil shells looks like a piece of broken glass with sharp edges, so small you cannot feel it on your own skin, but plenty sharp for something the size of an ant or a bedbug. Picture an ant crossing a thin white line of this powder on a kitchen floor. It does not slow down. It does not seem to notice anything at all. That's what makes this so different from everything else on the shelf. There is no smell, no sting, nothing to warn the ant away, so it just walks straight through like the line was never there. When an insect crawls through the powder, those sharp edges cut into the waxy outer coating of its shell, the same way a scratch in a rain jacket lets the water in. Scientists call this mechanical action desiccation, but you don't need to remember that word. Just remember it dries the bug out from the inside, like leaving a grape in the sun until it becomes a raisin. There is no chemical the bug can build resistance to, because there is no chemical at all. It is simply physics. Now, here is the honest caveat, and I promised myself I would never leave this part out. It does not work instantly. A chemical spray might kill on contact. This powder can take anywhere from a few hours to 3 or 4 days, depending on the insect and how much it walks through. If you are looking for something that drops every bug in front of you within 1 minute, this will disappoint you. It is not built for a battle. It is built for a siege. But that patience is exactly why it outlasts every spray can in the cabinet, and there's a reason for that too. I want to add one more piece to the science, because it is the part that surprised me most. I was standing at a farm auction some years back, leaning against a fence rail with a cup of coffee going cold in my hand, when an English fellow who studied agriculture struck up a conversation about grain storage. He told me the powder does not just dry the bug out through the cut in its shell. It also clings to the waxy layer itself and pulls at it, almost like chalk dust pulling moisture out of your hands on a dry day. That waxy layer is the only thing standing between the inside of the bug and the outside air. Once that layer is compromised, the insect cannot hold on to its own moisture no matter how still it sits or how much it hides. That is why you do not see bugs falling over dead in front of you the way you might with a spray. They wander off, weaker each day, and by the time you would notice them missing, they are already gone. It is quiet work, slow but thorough, and it is that same quiet, patient action that makes buying the right kind of powder so important, because not all diatomaceous earth is made the same way, and this is where most people go wrong before they even get started. Now, the materials, and this is the part I want you to write down, because getting this wrong is the single biggest mistake people make. You want food-grade diatomaceous earth. Grade, not pool grade. I will say that again because it matters that much. Food grade, never pool grade. Pool grade diatomaceous earth is heated at very high temperatures in a process called calcining, which changes the structure of the silica inside it and makes it dangerous to breathe, something that can scar the lungs over time if you inhale enough of it. Food grade is not heated that way, and it is safe enough that it is approved for use around livestock feed and even sold as a supplement for animals. I think back to the first time I bought a bag myself, walking into a feed store with sacks of grain stacked to the ceiling and the smell of molasses and hay thick in the air, and asking the man behind the counter for diatomaceous earth. He didn't even blink. He just walked me straight to a stack of bags near the livestock minerals, like it was the most ordinary request in the world, because to him it was. You will find a 10-pound bag of food-grade diatomaceous earth for about $7 to $12 at almost any feed store, and at some hardware stores and garden centers as well. It will not be sitting next to the bug sprays. It is usually back by the gardening section or with the livestock supplies, because most people buying it are farmers, not folks fighting an ant problem, which tells you something about how quiet this whole thing has stayed. Once you have the right bag in hand, the next part is where most people either get real results or waste their money entirely. The first thing you do, once you have your bag, is find the places bugs actually travel, not just where you see them, but the paths they use to get there. Along the baseboards where a wall meets a floor, underneath the refrigerator and stove where crumbs collect, around window frames and door thresholds, behind the toilet, in the gap where a pipe goes into the wall under the kitchen sink, along the underside edge of kitchen cabinets, where the wood meets the wall, and you would never think to look unless you got down on your knees with a flashlight. You take a small squeeze bottle, one you can buy for a couple dollars, or even an old spice shaker with the holes still in the lid, and you lay down a thin dusting. Not a pile, a dusting, so light you can barely see it unless the light hits it at the right angle. This is the mistake most people make. They think more powder means faster results, so they dump a thick layer down, and all that does is create a pile the bugs learn to walk around. A thin, even dusting an inch or two wide along a baseboard does more work than a heaping mound in one spot. After you have dusted the baseboards and the cabinet edges, move to the outside of the house if you have access, along the foundation line where the siding meets the ground, and around any exterior door thresholds. A 2-foot wide band along the base of the foundation keeps outdoor ants and beetles from ever making the decision to come inside in the first place. If you have a crawl space, a light dusting along the sill plate up top does the same work for anything traveling up through the floor joists. Let it sit. Do not vacuum it up after one day expecting results. That is like pulling a stew off the stove 5 minutes into cooking. Give it a full week before you judge whether it is working, and reapply lightly if it gets damp or disturbed, since moisture is the one thing that ruins its effectiveness. A powder that has gone damp and clumped is doing almost no work at all, so check it after any rain if you have applied it outdoors. Total cost for a whole house, corner to corner, indoors and out, usually runs under $15, and the time it takes to apply is maybe 20 to 30 minutes on a Saturday morning, less time than most people spend waiting on hold with a pest control company to schedule the next visit. Now, I will not sit here and tell you this fixes everything, because that would be a lie, and I did not build a name for myself in this county by lying to people. This powder struggles outdoors in the rain because water clumps it and washes it away. So if you are dealing with an outdoor infestation in a wet climate, you will be reapplying often, and some seasons it simply will not keep up. It is slower against a severe, established infestation than a professional-grade chemical treatment would be. If you have bed bugs in every room of a house, this alone may not be a fast enough fix, and you may need it as one part of a bigger plan rather than the whole plan. And in an older farmhouse like mine with wide gaps in the floorboards and mice traffic alongside insects, you are fighting an uphill battle no matter what powder you use. There is also the matter of bed bugs specifically, which I want to be honest about, because I know some of you searching for this are dealing with that exact nightmare. This powder can help against bed bugs, but it works far too slowly on its own to be the only tool against an infestation that bad. And most families in that situation need a combination of methods, sometimes including professional heat treatment, not this powder by itself. I say this not to talk you out of using it, but because I've seen what happens when someone expects a miracle and gets disappointed instead. They throw the whole idea out, powder and all, when the real problem was just expecting too much too fast. I tell you this because the videos that promise you a miracle and never mention the downside are the ones that lose your trust 6 months later when it does not work like they said. And I would rather you trust me in 5 years than be impressed by me for 5 minutes. And once you understand what this powder can't do, what it actually does well starts to look even more impressive. I remember my grandmother, who everyone in the district just called Mommy Esther, standing at her kitchen counter with a coffee can of this same powder, and she would take a wooden spoon and just barely dust the underside of the cabinets before bed, humming while she did it like it was no different than wiping the counter. The lamplight would catch the little cloud of white dust drifting off the spoon, and I remember thinking as a boy that it looked almost like flour, like she might be baking something instead of keeping the roaches out. She learned that from her mother, who kept it in an old lard tin, and neither one of them ever called it anything fancy. They just called it the white powder, and it was simply understood in the house, the way you understand to wipe your boots before coming inside. When I was maybe 8 years old, I asked her why we did not just buy the spray cans the English used, and she looked at me and said, in her plain way, "Because the ground already gave us what we need, Elias, we just have to be willing to use it, instead of pay for something worse." I did not understand what she meant until I was much older, when I had my own children and my own kitchen to keep. And I found myself standing at the same counter, dusting the same cabinets, with the same coffee can, and it struck me how much of what she gave me had nothing to do with the powder at all. It was the habit of looking for the plain answer before reaching for the expensive one. That habit is worth more than the powder itself, and it's the same habit I want to hand to you before this video is over. And that is really the bigger thing here, beyond the bugs in your kitchen. The average American family spends somewhere in the range of $500 to $800 a year on pest control services and store-bought sprays, according to industry estimates, money that adds up to real weight on a family budget over a decade, money that could go toward groceries or a car repair or getting ahead on a bill instead of falling behind. Multiply that across the tens of millions of households doing the same thing every year, and you start to see a pattern bigger than any one kitchen. This is not really about ants. This is about how much of the plain, ordinary knowledge our grandparents carried in their hands has quietly been replaced by a monthly bill. Nobody sat down and decided to take that knowledge away from you. It just slowly stopped getting passed down, generation by generation, until nobody thought to ask their grandmother what she used to keep the roaches out, and a truck showed up instead. So here is your plan for this weekend, plain and simple. First, get yourself a bag of food-grade diatomaceous earth from a feed store or garden center. Not pool-grade, food-grade, remember that. Second, walk your house and find the paths, the baseboards, the corners, under the fridge, around the pipes, and the foundation line outside if you can get to it. Third, lay down a thin, even dusting in those spots, not a pile, and give it a full week before you decide anything. Check it after any rain if it is outdoors, and reapply if it is clumped. That is the whole plan. Under $15, under 30 minutes, no trucks, no monthly bill, and no chemical you cannot pronounce, sitting in the air your children breathe. Tell me in the comments where you are from and what you are dealing with. Ants, roaches, spiders, whatever it is, because I read every single one and I answer what I can. And if you liked learning about this old powder, wait until I tell you about the mason jar trick my uncle used for 60 years to keep mice out of a grain bin without a single trap, because that one surprised even me the first time I saw it work. Until then, keep your hands busy and your pantry clean, and remember the people who built this country with their hands knew things we are only just starting to remember.